Hello and welcome to another episode of the Dope Designer Club. Today I have the pleasure to welcome my friend Jaime Otero to the show. Jaime is a producer in real life, but he has a really cool project and I wanted to highlight it immediately because it's a podcast. And it's a super creative podcast. And because this podcast is about all the different kinds of creative people, I felt that having Jaime on the show would be very appropriate. So welcome, Jaime.
Thank you very much, Branka. An honor to be here.
Thank you for coming. You. So your podcast...
Big fan of your podcast.
Oh, thanks. So your podcast is called Once Upon a Sound. Tell us about it.
Yes, I would say it's I want to think that it covers a wide space in the world of podcasts, which is the intersection between adventure, travel, and music creation. And it's all about unique sounds in the world that only exist in certain places. And then we travel to those places. It's an adventure podcast. There's always an adventure involved in finding the sound, understanding its deeper meaning, and then capturing that sound and sharing it with a local musician so that they can create a song out of the adventure. And in fact, the first pilot episode, which is the one that we've recorded so far, was recorded very close to your homeland in Croatia. Mm-hmm. And it was about the sea organ of Zadar, which is this human-made sea organ that in essence has 52 pipes where underwater where the water pushes the air, and that air goes into a labium, and that's an organ played by the sea. So that was our first episode.
Super cool, fascinating. So I want to also kind of make a distinction that your podcast is specifically only a audio podcast.
Yes.
I spent some time in one of my solo episodes, my only solo episode, talking about that for me, it was really important for the podcast to be also a visual experience. Mm-hmm. But yours is the opposite. And you also focus on sound. So you only rely on sound to tell your story. And when I was listening to that episode, which was really cool, by the way, I was really impressed with your ability to just use sound to tell the story. So when did you, I guess my question is, when did you become interested in telling these stories through sound?
Through sound. That's a very good question, because a lot of people are asking us, me and my two partners in the project, would you consider making a video out of it, right? Because we want to see these things, right? And my answer to them is well, that's part of your adventure. If you want to go see those things, travel there and experience it,
You do you.
And you do you in a way, right? But no, I think sound to me is a fascinating medium. No, as you mentioned, I come more from the film and TV space, where I've produced and directed both documentary and feature films, and to me, I always believe that restrictions in a way foster creativity. So only being able to play with sound, I think, is to me is very fascinating. In regards to when I decided I want to make this about unique sounds, it was a very specific moment when I was cycling in San Francisco, and I was crossing the Golden Gate Bridge, and it was extremely, extremely windy. And that would generate this a metallic hum. And I was biking across the whole traffic, and I couldn't hear those cars. It was such a loud, involving sound. And I remember actually crossing the bridge 2 times just to, absorb it.
So what was the sound of? It was of traffic or wind?
It was the metallic hum from the metal structure of the bridge.
So I guess the structure was vibrating.
Was vibrating because of the wind.
Was vibrating.
The bridge was vibrating. Yes. In fact, I did a little bit of research, and at some point I thought that might be the first episode, but I ended up switching plans a little bit. But it's interesting because even the neighbors complained about it, and there was all this controversy. can we change or edit or modify that bridge?
So it's kind of like a rattling sound. It's an unusual sound.
It's an extremely unusual sound because you're completely trapped by it. So you'll have cars driving by your side and you don't hear the cars. It's just such a loud hum. And to me, that was the eureka moment. I was like, this is it. This is a sound that only exists in certain places. There's a story behind this, and something to explore. And so I started identifying like different sounds, and then got together.
So here, this is another really fascinating, I think, aspect to your podcast. So every sound is very specific to the location. So it can't be found anywhere else. And we'll get really deep into this.
Right.
And I think that's really cool because it's almost like, the sound is creating this identity of a place. Do you want to talk about that a little bit?
Absolutely. I think that's part of it, without a doubt, right? And that's also why we wanted to return a little bit that whatever we're borrowing from that sound, no, and connect with the local musician that we'd be able to reinterpret, right, this sound into a song. That to us was very important, right? Not only quote unquote stealing the sound, but also transforming it and giving it back. And to us, it was key to do it within those local communities. What's fascinating is that these sounds, I think sometimes the local communities will have a very deep and special connection with them. Sometimes it might be the opposite. They might just be used to it, or they hate it. Exactly, like the neighbors from the Golden Gate Bridge, right? They might be like, we cannot wait for this to be done.
Yeah.
So it's interesting to see how that can. It runs the gamut. No, there's a wide spectrum.
Yeah, and does this sound like tell a story or evoke an emotion, or what's the essence of just like being captured by the sound?
Well,
what is your experience?
Yeah, totally. I think to me, it's like, we live in this world nowadays, right? Where we at most give every audiovisual stimuli half a second, maybe, when we're scrolling through Instagram. It's just like, okay, sound, video, sound, video, sound, video, sound, video, a few seconds, right?
Actually, a lot of people even have the sound off.
Even some have the sound off.
It's just visual.
Just visual, right? But even in the case where there's like a song or something, like we're looking at like all these trends, like TikTok is like shorter videos, like just a piece of the song, etc. Right? So I feel like this does almost the opposite, which is like, well, let's focus on one single audio stimuli in this case, which is the sound, and not only stop and listen to it for a while, but actually understand the story behind it, what created this, right? And so from that perspective, I think it's a little bit counter. It's a little bit, I don't know if the word's revolutionary, but it definitely goes against like many trends of like immediacy that.
Yeah, I like this idea of like slowing down time in a world where everything is instantaneous and everything is like so rapid. How you say? And I definitely had this. Feeling that first of all, once you start listening, you're kind of like turning off your eyes, and you're almost like going internally, first of all, into your imagination. So you have to, in your mind, visualize what's going on based on these sounds. And then on top of it, I think the whole episode for me was a little bit like a meditation. So
yeah, I think,
was that intentional?
I think it. I don't know if it was, to be honest, but because obviously there's a lot of adventure, right? And like it's the plot behind it, the story behind it is like the architect that built that's Jürgen, lives isolated on an island in Croatia, and we had to find him, right? But it is true that in the process of doing that, we've learned and discovered like a different pace, right? That maybe is reflected ultimately in the podcast and it's on the sound of it, right? And it's this Mediterranean pace that you probably know well, no? Where it's not so much about like, always looking for something new and exciting, but it's also like connecting with your traditions and with your ancestors, right? And connecting with those deeper emotions. So I think there's definitely a bit of that, but I don't know if we're so much to credit as to the world that we were visiting or navigating those days.
Right. So the first episode is Zadar in Croatia with a sea organ. I was really impressed listening to it. But then you have other episodes that happen in different places.
Yes. Yeah. I mean, and I always joke with my partners in the podcast is like, well, is this just an excuse for us to travel, right? But which I love traveling. But I think there's always a beauty in connecting an outsider's perspective with the local perspective on something, right? Because the locals will have a deeper meaning and an understanding of what that is, but at the same time, you come with a fresh perspective and you realize things that maybe they don't. So I think that's why it makes a lot of sense for us to go to a lot of places where we haven't been and being able to like share our new perspective, you know, be the eyes of the audience that maybe hasn't been there either, right? And for them to understand that. So yes, we have episodes in the US, we have episodes planned in Europe, in Africa, in Latin America, and hopefully soon in Asia.
I've noticed that in one of your future episodes, you're interested in this volcano place in Italy. Tell me a little bit about that. And also, like, how do you like select like what's an interesting sound? Have you been there to know, or how do you research it? How do you even know about these sounds?
Well, one thing that's starting to happen, which is very cool, I think, is like the more people we talk about Once Upon a Sound, the more people that are also suggesting sounds now, right? But no, we do research, and I think it's a lot about like it's what makes a sound unique is on the one hand, well, the sound in itself has to be special, but it's also about like what's the story and meaning for the local communities, right? So obviously the Etna has like a lot of traditions and connotations.
Yeah, I said the volcano place.
Yeah, that one. that one. And it has like a very long-standing tradition, and there's a culture of volcanoes around Italy that's very important. But there's also been a lot of studies into understanding the data, the seismic data that is tracked around volcanoes, understanding it and transforming it into sound so that it can be better interpreted, which I think is fascinating, right? So that's one of the point of views why we thought like volcanoes would be super interesting to explore.
So what is the sound? Like, is it the rumbling of the volcano?
Well, there's two components to it, right? And one is, and by the way, I'm talking without having made the episode because there's always
that's okay. I'm interested also in the process. So
yes,
this is cool.
I mean, but I'm talking, meaning in the process itself, like there's always discovery, right? But yes, what I think is what attracts me most about that concept is, on the one hand, we have the roar of the volcano, right, which is one of the most fascinating natural elements, right, that you can follow and track. But on the other side, there's this whole concept of how can you visualize data, seismic data, that can help you predict when a volcano is going to be in active eruption. I'm going to New Zealand soon, and there was like a very famous case there of a volcano that entered an eruption while there were people on an island. So being able to understand that data by transforming it into sound. And I think that's fascinating. It talks about how, I mean, if you apply to many other things, it talks about like how maybe we're limited in how we identify or read data because we're only using our eyes to do that as opposed to our ears.
Interesting. So a lot of times when I interview people, I kind of start it as a therapy session. So we begin by talking about your childhood and
perfect.
Like your influences and your parents and your traumas. But actually, I kind of like that we're talking first about your project, and then we're going to backtrack to the traumas later.
Fantastic. 2 birds, 1 stone, you know?
But I also kind of think it's so cool that you're focusing on this like sound medium. And I want to mention and kind of segue into you had this long-standing interest in sound, and most notably through being a DJ.
Yes.
Which I think is really cool. So you know, you have your day job, right? You're a producer, but you're doing this podcast. But then before you were doing the podcast, you've been a DJ for like a decade or something. So tell me about how did you become a DJ and your whole career, your whole DJing career?
Okay, so yeah, I've always loved music, but I never played any musical instrument. I didn't have musical education from that perspective, right? I only studied the flute in school, which is probably the best way not to get you into instruments. But no, I was living in Italy when I started DJing, and I was studying there in college, and I was having a great time, but I was spending a lot of money going out, and at some point I was like, no, it would be nice if I could make some money going out at night. And so I figured out, I met this PR there. I think he was Albanian, and he mentioned that he knew two guys that I guess I can say that just left prison, and they were opening a bar, and they didn't know how to run it. And I came to them, and I came.
Wait a sec. So you met this Albanian,
Mm-hmm.
and they opened a bar after escaping prison,
No,
or
they left.
or being released.
They were released. As far as I know,
Okay,
they were released and not being.
So
and not being
definitely like some
pursued.
shady like.
Well, you know
moments.
what? I don't know. I never asked them while they were there in the first place, but they were super nice people. So and they were super welcoming. And I sold them on this idea of like having a party. It was in Florence, and I sold them on this idea of having a party for international students. And they were sold, and then they were like, how about the music? And I was, like, let's go get it mode. So I was like, I'll take care of it. And then they showed me this like huge, mixer with all the buttons and stuff that I had no idea what they would do. And so I spent 2 weeks literally going out every night and just getting close to the DJs and trying to figure out what they were doing. And eventually they would ask me like, hey, do you want a song? Like, what's your deal? And I would tell them a little bit of the story. And they would be like, yeah, this is what I'm doing, this, I do this, I do that. And the first party came, and I think I DJed really horribly bad, and you could hear like, the beats not syncing, but eventually I got better at it, and I ended up playing like in the biggest club in Florence, which was very exciting.
And you mentioned that at some point you had a billboard in Florence of yourself.
Yes.
Was that humbling? Was that like, did it feed your ego? Were you embarrassed? How did you...
Interesting.
What was your reaction to that?
That's a very good question. I think the whole way I was living that experience, like being an international student, living in a country abroad for the first time, I think, and within a community of like-minded people, I felt like the spirit was always, the world might end tomorrow, and we need to do everything today. And tomorrow would be like, oh, well, seems like the world's not ending, but who knows? Maybe it ends tomorrow. So let's keep doing it, right? And so it was all within that cloud of, let's of carpe diem. And so I thought about it like part of that. It was just like, why not? The world might end tomorrow, so let's get this out.
Party.
Let's party. Let's party and let's unite people, because that's also something that I've always wanted to do, right? And in a way, I think there was this connective tissue, because I was like, in the same way, I'm now trying to bring sounds from all around the world, and for people to hear them, understand the culture. What I was DJing there that was quote unquote unique is that it was a party for international students from the US, from Germany, from France, from Spain, from all these different countries. And so I was trying to play all the different hits of that time in the different countries.
What were the hits?
Well, it would be, Mojo Lady in France, or it would be I don't know, like Alaska, or something in Spain. There were all these songs, but my hope was that, and it's still my hope today when I DJ, is that I can showcase some music or some remixes or something that you never heard about, but that you can't not dance to. And so it's just like, in a way, expanding your perspective and mindset around, life.
Good. So in this DJing sort of career that you had,
that I still have, by the way. I still play once a month for fun,
but like back then, you did it like
I did it, like every week, a couple of days,
days a week, regularly.
Very regularly, yes.
So you mentioned like this, connecting people, or creating this experience for them. Do you also connect with people as you play these sets?
Yeah, I think so. I think it's a dance. I think I think what you're doing, in essence, I mean, I think if you're only projecting what you want to play, that's very limiting. If you're only catering to the audience and just playing hit after hit after hit, I think it's, you're a Spotify playlist in a way. I think it's a dance. It's like you have an idea of what you want to play, but you also hear and listen to the reaction. And so I've heard it being referred to as a dance. I've heard it being referred to as somewhat similar to romance or even sex, because it's having that connection and letting yourself flow, I think, and that's the most beautiful moment, I would say, of DJing.
Cool. Is there like a technical aspect to DJing that you think is like cool or complicated, or how, like if somebody wanted to be a DJ, what sort of technical expertise do they need?
Well, I show you a bit of that, so maybe you have a take on this question too. But no, I think you know what, the technique is much easier than people think. And I'm not talking about this from the perspective of me being the most technical DJ out there, but I don't think that's what matters. I think what matters is having being able to empathize with your audience, but also really being passionate about music and not being afraid to explore, right? So I think that's what's key. And then, well, technically, you need to align the beats. There's songs that will work or might not work. There's different ways to mix, and you get better about it over time, right? But I think the most important thing is what makes you unique and what music you control and what's the journey and the story that you tell through your DJ set.
So we talked about all your different projects and careers and all these things. You're a podcaster, you're a DJ, but let's focus on your day job. Like, you're a producer. So what do you do as a producer?
Yeah, so that's a very good question, because being a producer in film can mean so many different things, right? And there's people that will put money and just ask for a credit or stuff like that. No, I think
we'll put what?
We'll add money to the film and then just ask for a credit in return, and that can also be a producer. That's not what I do. What I do, I like to be in the projects that I participate in from the beginning, provide creative input and guidance, help put together the teams and understand. I think, again, goes back a little bit to empathy and understanding what might be missing. If you have a first time, I particularly like a lot to work with first time directors, because I think from that perspective, they have unique visions and they're open to hearing, from a lot of people. And so it's about how identifying their strengths and also then being able to provide, a whole environment that will support them as the best way possible and to execute on their vision. So I do that. I work also on the distribution side. I've directed some documentaries in the past. I also work on the data side as well, helping companies make decisions based on that. So I do a lot of different things in the film and TV space, which to me is fascinating, because I always felt it's very unique how we can connect with our emotions through film without a layer of cynicism or distance, right? And through film and TV, I would say nowadays. And so it's a medium and industry that I love. The other thing is it's always shifting, so you never really get tired of it, because the industry itself is changing. Now, these days, we're going through the writer's strike. Tomorrow, there's AI. Tomorrow, there's going to be something else. So it's really cool.
So speaking of all these different media, do you think that the podcast as its own kind of new form of expressing, we're here now, right? And what is your take on that? I always felt that for me at least, anybody can start a podcast, right? It doesn't take much. You can order. It doesn't need to be produced professionally. You can buy a cheap camera. You can record yourself with an iPhone.
This is a very professionally produced podcast, by the way.
Well, yes. But what I wanted to also, for me, visually and even, all of this photography and everything is important. But anybody can express themselves the way they want to. For some people make video podcasts where the picture isn't important at all. So it's just they're filming but it's essentially an audio podcast.
Yeah,
and
look at
like Joe Rogan or
Joe
whatever.
Rogan,
It's
yeah,
like
exactly.
not aesthetic. It's like just whatever.
Mm-hmm.
But don't you think that it's also kind of like a new wave of like creators have access to something like this? I think it also kind of democratizes like a whole expression. What do you see, since you're already like in this industry? I'm just really winging it, like, so.
Yeah, no, I think that's a great question. I think to a certain degree something a little bit similar happened as well in film and TV, and it's that the resistance that we've removed for new creators, right, is not the access to the media itself, but is right now the key is the access to the audience, right? Because to your point, like, anybody can make a podcast. It's about like, well, if you want to make a living out of it, right? How do you engage with audiences? How do you engage with brands? How do you engage with networks, etc.? So we've moved away from how am I able to finance or fund my content to how am I able to connect with an audience. And I think that that's very interesting, because it's also it's also changing the type of creators that come, right? The type of creators that want to explore the media are creators that have a much more immediate connection with their audiences, or that are trying to have that, as opposed to what used to be more like the artist, author, creator, which was like, I have a vision and this is the film that I want to make, or this is the podcast that I want to make. And if someone likes it, great. And if not, that's fine too, right? And so I think from that perspective, it's changed a lot, and it's very interesting. The other thing that I really like about the podcast community to me is like, I went to a podcast conference in Vegas a few months ago, and I could feel this like enthusiasm about what people do. They not only about what they do in the industry, the projects that they're part of, but they also want to hear about your projects, and they're excited because it's a fairly new industry from that perspective. And there's all these like attitudes that you find sometimes in film and TV markets, which is like, I've been through this 20 times, 20 years. I'm, okay, tell me something I haven't heard. Okay, this is not interesting. Sorry, move on. All those things are not in podcasts. It's like it does feel like a family where, you have a podcast and you find my podcast interesting and you invite me, and hopefully I can, record an episode in Serbia one day, and return the favor, and there's all this like connectivity, right? Which I think it's very, very cool.
Yeah, sure.
Do you feel that way with other podcasters? By the way, how do you feel about other podcasters? Do you feel
honestly,
a sense of community?
I think podcasting, I'm excited about it. Not just for my podcast, but I think it's like, I like watching other podcasts. Like I recently, I'm watching Jay Shetty a lot. But I think it's cool because in some ways, like you said, like before you had these like big studios and they would kind of curate, like what the content is on all these, like CNN or like Oprah or like whatever. And I think in that sense, I think it's, we have content or conversations, discussions, projects that aren't necessarily sponsored by the man,
Yeah.
And that's why I think we're getting this richness and diversity of, people. And I think my big thing too is that one of the reasons I wanted to create the podcast was to champion people like you, or like we had different guests like who are creative in maybe a non-traditional sense. And so that stuff you don't see, like what is the stuff that people consume in media? Like it's like how to put makeup or fashion or whatever, but this way, I think we can put to the forefront all these like really like talented, hardworking, amazing people, really. So I think that is my take. Yeah.
Well, thank you for having me.
Yeah, absolutely. So as a
I don't know about amazing, but I know how it works.
Yeah. So as a producer, you worked. I looked at the kind of movies you worked on, and they're all very different. Like there was this 30 Lights movie
Uh-huh.
that
30 Souls, yes.
I'm not sure if I even like understand what it's about. It seemed like it's like this really remote community, and it's like about nature and their customs or something. Then you film something like about the Arab Spring, and the last one, Malecon.
Malecon, yeah.
Malecon, or is it Malecon?
Malecon. It's which is like a very famous road, I would say, in La Habana that looks at the water.
Right. Which is very like Almodovar of you. So it's like a really kind of broad spectrum of the movies that you're involved in. Like how do you pick these movies, and like is there like a kind of a focus or a niche, or you like keeping it very open?
Mm-hmm. I think it's to me it goes back again to exploring realities that I didn't know before as well, and that are new and unique, and being able to share that vision with others, right? And coming with in a way like an outsider view, but being very, very rooted where you're doing that, right? So if you think about like A Common Enemy, right, which is this documentary in Tunisia, which was the first country that spurred the Arab Spring, and it's all about the key characters or characters that had a key role in the Arab Spring and how they're evolving towards their first democratic elections. And to me, like being able to be there with an outsider view, but also being very entrenched in these lives and situations was fascinating, no? And so I think that if I were to make, a similar documentary where I would be a central character, I would be taking away from that reality, no? Same thing happens ultimately through 30 Souls, right? Which is Trinta Lumes, which is this film in this like very remote region of the northwest part of Spain, in Galicia. And it's about this last community where these three little towns in the middle of the mountains where there's so many people that have left, and there's only 30 kids left, and these 30 kids go to schools. And this is a mix of documentary and fantasy, which are two genres that don't generally blend together. And in this case, it worked beautifully. I think the director did a great job. And it's about the traditions, but also the myths and the legends of these kids. And it all starts with one of the kids, and everybody that is shown on camera are the real people here. And one of the kids disappearing, right? And the myths and traditions that might be behind this disappearance. And then when we look at Malecon, it's a deeply rooted Cuban story. All Cuban actors, everything shot in Cuba, and pretty much all the crew's Cuban, majority female, which we were very excited about as well. And
I thought it was about like a trans person. Was that a trans person?
Well, there's a singer, right? Yeah. That's a travesti, I would say, and that's just part of the trailer, and it's part of a key scene. But it's really the story of Elvis, this character that that enters prison as a teen and leaves like 10 years later for a tragic incident that happens, and when he leaves, his whole reality has changed. His girlfriend at the time is married and has a kid. His best friend at the time now is immersed in this like prostitution underworld, and he has to figure out his house is not. He cannot even live in his house. His family is no more, and he has to figure out whether he can stay in Cuba or, as many other Cubans, look for better opportunities. I think that the common thread between these three projects is that although they're very local and specific to the realities, I want to think that they have a universal plot to them and themes to them, universal themes where like everybody can empathize with them, even if you're living a reality that's very different and distant from theirs. So I think those are the common threads between these three projects.
So I guess the common thread, to just paraphrase, if I may, please, is to somehow showcase the humanity and like between these different cultures.
Yes,
so to speak.
Yes, exactly. I think humanity is universal, right? And then there's cultural traits that make these stories different.
Yeah, because we have like a very remote Spanish village. You
yes.
have the Arabs. You have Cubans.
Yes.
Underworld. So it's very disparate milieus, if you will.
Mm-hmm.
But I guess it's the human stories of like survival or that link them together. So
Yes.
that's been your focus or interest.
Absolutely.
Throughout your career. That's very cool. So
thank you for the rephrase.
Yeah. Speaking of culture, so you're born in Canada, but you're from Spain.
Mm-hmm.
Your family is from Spain,
mm-hmm.
and you grew up in Spain.
Mm-hmm.
What values from your culture kind of inform the person that you are and the work that you do?
Yes, good question. Well, I grew up.
Thank you. A lot of good questions.
You really did? I would say I grew up I was born in Canada. I left when I was a toddler. I grew up in Madrid and Barcelona. I lived in Italy. Now I've been living in LA and coming up to 10 years now. And I think that I've always had this feeling of, not being necessarily from like one single place. My family's from a different region of Spain, actually. And
what region of Spain?
Galicia in the northwest.
Yes. Where Asterix and Obelix, or no?
No, that's Galia. It would be like France, but yeah, it's a very interesting part of Spain that even has Celtic culture, and people play bagpipes, and the seafood is great, but it rains all the year round. It's very unique.
And this is in Spain.
And this is in Spain, yeah, mm-hmm. Yeah. And so I think to me, it's like I've always had that sense of like not fully belonging to one place, and that has pros and cons. On the one hand, you don't feel as rooted, right? On the other hand, that also allows you to like explore and live and try to like find roots in other places, no? From the perspective of the culture, I think, Spanish culture in general is all about community, right? Which has pros and cons. Everybody wants to know what you're doing, who you're dating, like, what's up with you, like, what's the last project, right? Mm-hmm. Like, but at the same time, you build this like very strong bonds with a lot of people. And even if you don't, like, if you just go out to the street and you go to a bar, you're already connecting with people, right? I feel like that's a little bit different from maybe life in the US or in other places. But I would say those community and family are very, very strong ties. And then I would say also like a sense of humor, being able to make fun of pretty much everything and anything.
That's interesting. I feel very similar to you in the sense that I grew up, well, I was born in Serbia, but then I went to school in New York for most of elementary school, and then I went and finished elementary school and started high school in Serbia, but then finished it in New York again, and a lot of my family,
and the Hawaii experience,
and then but also like my dad lives in Switzerland. I have a lot of family in Italy, so I think this kind of multiculturalism as you're growing up definitely like opens up your world. In some ways, I feel that during COVID, especially for like my daughter, it was the opposite. Like our worlds really shrunk. So yes. I appreciate that perspective that you bring. And then our culture also, like, I think, for me, like, I'm kind of neither there or here, but I definitely appreciate from our culture the same kind of like family oriented, community oriented. So I think that comes from like that Mediterranean, Southern Europe
totally
vibe. You mentioned how you grew up in these different places. You also have like very like diverse interests. You mentioned you came from boxing. Like, what are some other things that you do?
Sure. Yeah. I mean, I surf. I box. I sail. I love sailing. Always did. There's a bit of a backstory about my sailing passion in the podcast, actually. I love tennis, basketball, like really being out there, no, and again and connecting, right? And I think you brought a very interesting point in that. I think for someone that is wired like myself, where like that connection is so important, I think that, a situation like COVID, right, where we were all like, we had to isolate, and I think like people's psyche also changed a little bit, even post COVID, right, where we felt like a lot of people felt the need to like really focus on themselves and create bubbles, right? I would say that that's not necessarily like the space where I feel more comfortable with. Like I'm a connector by nature. I like to, connect with people, and benefit from that, right?
Cool. Excellent. So I have an interesting question that I heard on another podcast that I want to ask you. When was the last time you did something for the first time?
When was the last time I did something for the first time? I know, right? I know. There's something. If you give me a second, I think I'll figure it out.
Can I say something?
Yeah, please.
At your suggestion, I got a wetsuit recently, and I was able to swim in a really freezing ocean. So it was like my first wetsuit experience.
How was it getting it off?
Yeah. Anyways, it can be something like that.
Yeah. That
like
makes...
you didn't have to like skydive.
Okay, that makes
like using a new toothpaste also qualifies.
Yes. Yeah. Okay. I would say one recent one that I did was I traveled on my own recently to Puerto Rico, and not only and there wasn't a mission behind it. I've done solo travel in the past, but there was always a mission. Like sometimes I was writing a script and I would go to an island or a remote place to focus on write on the script. In this case, no, I just decided to, there was something that called me about Puerto Rico, and I traveled on my own there. And
was it J-Lo?
Yeah, exactly. It was J-Lo. It was probably more J-Lo than Bad Bunny. No, I like Bad Bunny too. But no, I went there for like 5-6 days, connected with the people, made so many friends, made friends from Puerto Rico, made friends from Milwaukee, made friends from like all over, the people that I met there. And I went surfing and I discovered the island. And when I finished, I asked myself, like, why don't I do this more often? Sometimes I think being able to do things without a purpose, just for the sake of trying them out and exploring, I think that's very refreshing, and enriching in so many ways.
Is there somebody that you can think of that influenced you or was a mentor that kind of helped you become who you are today?
I think I think of all people, my grandfather that passed away some years ago, and I think because he was a person, a larger than life, I think, personality that was able to forge his own path. He grew in a very, very, very humble family in Galicia, and had to carry on, almost like take care of his siblings there. And he didn't have the chance to be educated, but he was able to, little by little, create his own business. He bought like a bus line, and with the money of running it, bought another bus line, and eventually he was running one of the biggest like bus companies in Spain. And to me, the most interesting thing that he did with that is that he didn't solely focus on growing the business, but he saw that as an opportunity to also provide, or to create, to provide himself like that education that he had missed, right? So he became a huge fan of classical music. He traveled the world with my grandmother, who's 98 years old, and I sent a big kiss to La Abuela, and he was able to carry this life. He was the president of a soccer club, and he managed to get it to first division in Spain from a little village.
Wait, can you repeat that?
He became the president of the Pontevedra Club de Fútbol, which is
soccer. Okay.
Yes, and which is this town that has like 80,000 people at most, and managed to get it to like first division and maintain it there. And it was, and then started playing golf at age 55 or 60, and win like senior tournaments. So he was this like larger than life character, and I think to me his story has always been very, very compelling, right? Because it helped break away some walls that we internally create as to what might be our limitations in life, right? Or how we might be just almost like prisoners of our circumstances.
Right. There's a quote by Dostoevsky about something like that you don't need. I recently posted it and I was thinking about it. That you don't necessarily need like walls or bars to be in a prison. And the best way to actually keep someone a prisoner is to never let them know
that they're
in prison.
Yes.
And it's really about mindset. And I think to me, I can definitely, like the way you describe him, he seems like a really like dynamic, active person, and everything I know about you is definitely kind of along those lines. So
Thank you. But I would say like we all fall in these mental prisons, I think, right? Yeah. And it's so fascinating because sometimes when you're able to leave them behind, you look at them and you're like, wait, but that was, it was so easy to escape from that prison. But in the moment, you're right, you just didn't know you were there.
Yeah.
That happens.
And maybe to kind of end on a good note, what advice would you give somebody who's either just entering a field or starting a new project or thinking about becoming a DJ or producer? What words of advice would you have?
Good question. I think my advice would be don't try to do it all on your own. Like connect with people, learn, try always to work with people that you consider best at what they do than what you do, and always keep that learning mentality. Don't be scared about showing that maybe you don't know as much as you think you should, because everybody has that imposter syndrome. So get that out of the way and just work. I think there's so many benefits into working with people that are good at what they're doing. And those benefits, what you learn from them, goes beyond what they're good at. But you can apply it to so many other fields, right? And also, I think it's also good to abandon this mentality that you're a cog in a wheel and there's only one thing you can do. No, you can do many things. You can be a brilliant architect and have your own podcast and be a great mother of 1 and 3 dogs. Like you can do that. And I think there's that people need to realize, right, that we can be more than one person at the same time, and that's fine.
Excellent. Thank you.
No, thank you very much for having me. This is a lot of fun.
This was awesome.
Thank you.
Yay! We can continue drinking.
Yay!
This was great.
I think
actually, especially toward the end, you had many quote
Party puppy.
Thank you so much.
Oh yeah, it was great to meet you.
Thank you. Likewise.
Yeah, I've always wanted to learn how to mix.
Oh yeah, I can teach you one day.
That would be fun. I gotta get my friend was like, you just have to get a CDJ, and I'm like, I'm not spending $2,000 on a deck.
No, I hear your plus. The problem is if you get the equipment that they have in clubs is generally like a one CDJ, one other CDJ, and the mixer,
in the middle.
And all that combines
Here,
like 5 or 6K.
Yeah.
What I have is just everything.